You open your eyes to a slight glimmer of light, hazy, uncertain, and shivering in the December cold of South London. As your eyes adjust, you recognize the shimmer and glare of the North Star dancing above the church spires and the rooftops of the city. Bells ring in the distance. Hushed voices rise up from the streets, tempting you with snippets of conversation. But you turn your attention instead to the window of a three-story counting house and to the man seated at his desk inside. This is Ebenezer Scrooge, and he is about to entertain, or at least tolerate, his first visitor of the evening.
A Merry Christmas, Uncle.
This is the hopeful voice of Scrooge's nephew, all too used to disappointment, but full of eternal optimism.
Humbug.
Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure.
I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. If I had my will, every douchebag who goes about Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding. He should.
Uncle, I cannot understand why you would call anyone a douchebag who says Merry Christmas.
Nephew, keep Christmas your way, and let me keep it mine.
Keep it? But you don't keep it.
Let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you.
I have always thought of Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, and therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it.
Good day, sir.
I'll keep Christmas humor to the last, so Merry Christmas, Uncle.
Good day, sir.
And a Happy New Year, too.
I said good day, sir.
His nephew shuffles out of the room without an angry word, but his clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, hustles two other people inside.
At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, we should make some slight provisions of the poor and destitute for who suffer greatly at this present time. A few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. What shall I put down for you?
Nothing.
You wish to be anonymous?
I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there.
Many can't go there, and many would rather die.
If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population.
Closing time at the counting house arrived. Scrooge's only remaining employee, Bob Cratchit, waits nervously to ask his employer for a day off.
Mr. Scrooge, sir, it's Christmas Eve, and tomorrow I'd like to be home with my family.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. September would be dumb. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning.
Scrooge took his melancholy dinner with his usual melancholy tavern and went home to bed. Now it is a fact that there is nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door of his house, except that it was very large. And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light around it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar, or another extremely strange metaphor. As Scrooge looked at this, it was the knocker again. He said,
Bish posh.
And he closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellars below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and locked himself in, double locked himself in, which was his custom. Thus securing against surprise, he put on his dressing gown, his slippers, and his nightcap, and he sat down before the very low fire to take his gruel. As he threw his head back in the chair, he glanced upon a disused bell that hung in the room. It was with great astonishment and with a strange dread that as he looked, he saw this bell begin to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This was succeeded by a clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain across the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard this noise much louder on the floors below, then coming up the stairs, then straight towards his door. It came on through the heavy door, and the spectre passed into the room before his eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up, as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost."
What do you want with me?
Much.
Who are you?
Ask me who I was.
Who were you then?
Oi, in life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley.
The ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it.
You don't believe me?
I don't.
Why do you doubt your senses, mate?
Because a little thing affects them. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are.
The spirit raised a frightful cry.
Ooh, ah!
Mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me? Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?
It's not me.
It is required of every man. The spirit within him should walk among his fellow men and travel far and wide. The spirit goes not forth in life. It is condemned to do so forth after death. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me! In life, my spirit never roved beyond our money-changing hoe and weary journeys life before me.
Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear the spectre going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly.
I am here tonight to warn you, you have one yet chance of hope of escaping my fate. You will be haunted by free spirits. Expect the first when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second the next hour, the third upon the next. When the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate, look to see me no more.
Scrooge tried to say humbug, but stopped the first syllable, and being, from the motion he had undergone, or the fatigues of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the conversation of the ghost, or the lateness of the hour, he went instead straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep on the instant. When Scrooge awoke, the church clock told a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of the bed were drawn aside by a strange figure.
Are you the spirit, sir?
I am.
Whose coming was foretold to me?
I am.
Who and what are you?
Ghost of Christmas past.
As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfares of the city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here too was Christmas time. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it.
Know it! I apprenticed here.
They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Welsh wig, sitting behind such a high desk that, if it had been 2 inches taller, he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried out in great excitement.
Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again!
Yo ho there, Ebenezer, you dick.
A living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice.
Yo ho, my boys. No more work tonight. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear the way, my lads, and let's have lots of room here.
Clear away. There was nothing that they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. The warehouse was as snug and warm and dry as bright as a ballroom as you could have desired to see on a winter's evening. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk. A Madine orchestra of it, and tuned like a 50 stomach ache. Yeah, that was a great line reading. Let's try that again. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk, and Madine orchestra of it, and turned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast smile. In came the three Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In all they came, anyhow and any way. Away they all went, 20 couples at once. Hands half round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round, old top couples always turning up in the wrong places. When the clock struck 11, this ball broke up. Mrs. and Mrs. Fezziwig shaking hands with every person as he went out, wishing him or her a Merry Christmas.
A small matter to make these silly folk so full of gratitude. He has spent but a few pounds of your money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?
It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our servants a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. Spirit, remove me from this place. Prompt me no longer.
As he struggled with the spirit, he was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, of being in his own bed. He had barely time to reel to bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. I like this part. Let's do it longer. Scrooge awoke in his bedroom. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove. The leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney. Heaped upon the floor, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, great joints of meat, pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, great bowls of punch, and immense 12 cakes. Upon this couch there sat a giant glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch.
Come in and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. Have you never seen the likes of me before? Touch my robe. Yeah.
Against my better judgment.
Scrooge did as he was told and held it fast. The room and all its contents all vanished instantly, and they stood in the city street upon a snowy Christmas morning. Scrooge and the ghost passed on, invisible, straight to Scrooge's clerks, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit dwelling in the sprinklings of his torch. Then he rose up. Mrs. Cratchit.
What has ever got your precious father, then? And your brother, Tiny Tim?
In came Bob, the father, his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch, and had his limbs supported by an iron frame.
And how did little Tim behave?
Damn it, Bob.
As good as gold and better. Somehow he got thoughtful, sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you've ever heard. He told me coming home that he had hoped that people saw him in the church because he was a cripple. It might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see.
Master Peter and the two young Cratchits went to fetch a goose, with which they returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter smashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce, as she did. Martha dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everyone, not forgetting themselves, and crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. As the dishes were set on and grace was said, it was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it into the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight rose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handles of the knife and forcefully cried,
Hurrah!
But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone to take the pudding up and bring it in. Mrs. Cratchit entered, smiling proudly with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half and half of a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedlit with Christmas holly stuck to the top.
Oi, a pudding!
At last the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. Then all the Cratchit family drew around the hearth, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. They were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they faded, they looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting. Scrooge had his eyes upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last. But the whole scene passed off, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels, much as they saw, as far as they went, and many houses they visited, but always with a happy ending. Suddenly, as they stood together in an open place, the bell struck 3. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of an old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like the mist along the ground towards him.
Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. Will you not speak to me?
But it gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before him.
Lead on, lead on! The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me. I know. Lead on, spirit!
They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up around them. But there they were in the heart of it among all the merchants. The spirit stopped beside a couple of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointing towards them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. A man with a monstrous chin said, "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." Another man asked, "When did he die, and what has he done with all of his money?" The man with the monstrous chin replied, "Last night, I believe, and I haven't heard. Company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." The scene has changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light rising in the outer air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, unmourned, was the body of this unknown man.
Spirit, let me see some tenderness connected with a death, or this dark chamber, spirit, will be forever present to me.
The ghost conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling he had visited before, and found the mother of the children seated around the fire. Quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before them. The mother and her daughters were engaged in needlework, but surely they were very quiet. In the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. The mother laid her work upon the table and put her hands up to her face.
The color hurts my eyes. They're better now again. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show weak eyes till father when he comes home, for the world. It must be near his time, but I think he has walked a little slower than he used to these few last evenings. I've known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder very fast indeed, but he was very light to carry, and his father loved him so that it was no trouble at all. And there's your father at the door.
She hurried out to meet him, and Bob came in. His tea was ready for him, and they all tried who should help him to it the most. Then the two young Cratchits got upon their knees and laid each child a little cheek upon his face, as if they said, "Don't mind it, father, don't be grieved." Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised Mrs. Cratchit and the girls.
You went today then, Robert?
Yes, my dear, I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is, but you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday, my little child, my poor little Tim.
Spectre, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was with the covered face, whom we saw lying dead.
The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge crept up towards it, trembling as he went.
Whose lonely grave is this?
Why, yours, Ebenezer, the richest man in the graveyard.
No,
Yes,
spirit! Oh, no. Spirit, hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Why show me this if I am past all hope? Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone.
Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an altercation in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. He was checked in the transports by the churches ringing out in the lowest pedals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his big head. No fog, no mist, no night. Clear, bright, sterling, golden day.
What's today?
Cried Scrooge, calling downtown to a boy in Sunday clothes. The boy replied, "Why, it's Christmas Day."
It's Christmas Day! I haven't missed it! Shout out, my fine fellow! Down at the Bolters! In the next street there is a prize turkey that was hanging in the window. Not the little prize turkey, the big one. Go and buy it and tell them bring it here. I may give them a direction where to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown.
The boy was off like a shot.
I'll send it to Bob Cratchit. See, Shat-Nose sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim.
Scrooge dressed himself in all his best and at last got out into the streets. The people were by this time pouring forth, and he had seen them with the ghost of Christmas present, and, walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one of them with a delightful smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant. Scrooge was the greeting people left and right.
Good morning! Oh, Merry Christmas to you!
He was early at the office the next morning. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. The clock struck 9. No Bob. No quarter past. No Bob. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock.
Hello. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?
I'm very sorry, sir. I'm behind on my time.
You are? Yes, I think you are. Step right this way, if you please. Now, I tell you what, my friend. I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer, and therefore I am about to raise your salary.
Bob trembled.
A Merry Christmas, Bob! A Merrier Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family.
Fuck yeah!
Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good as a friend, as good a master, and as good as a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and he was quite enough for them. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well. May that be truly said of us, of all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed,
Real talk. God bless us, everyone.